These are serious indictments.
Attorney General Chris Mays announces felony charges against the 11 so-called fake electors and 7 co-conspirators who tried to throw out the results of the 2020 presidential election. We'll look at how we got here and what's likely to happen moving forward. The House voted to repeal the territorial abortion law and now heads to the state Senate. Our panel looks at the political fallout next on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. And this week, the Attorney General announced indictments of the 11 fake electors, a group that includes 2 sitting state senators. The grand jury also indicted 7 co-conspirators, a group that includes former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. The electors recorded themselves signing a document that falsely claimed they were the duly elected and qualified electors. They were not, and now face charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, which carry the possibility of prison time. And I want to bring in our chief investigative reporter, Morgan Loew. You've been digging into all these documents since the news dropped on all of this, and want to get a sense from you what happens next. We learned later this week, or just yesterday, that they're going to be appearing in court. They're going to be arraigned on March 21st. What can we expect when this happens?
Yeah, so this is an indictment, and it's also the type of case where these people are not being arrested. We're not going to get booking photos of them. They're going to show up to the arraignment. They're going to appear with their lawyers. And at that point, the judge, the prosecutor there will formally tell them what the charges are. They've got the documents. They know what they are. But they'll set any conditions of release. In a situation like this, I would be highly surprised if there was any bail set or anything like that. I mean, own recognizance, but that is the beginning then of the court process, and it is the reality check. Hey, this is real. We've got to show up with our lawyers, and this could be a very long, very expensive process for these defendants that very well may end up with some of them in prison.
Yeah, and let's talk about how this could be a long process. Some of these people are running for re-election in various offices. How long could a crime like a trial like this play out? I mean, could it be a year, 2 years? What are we talking about?
So a vast majority of criminal cases end up with plea deals anyway, and are adjudicated maybe not right away, but a lot faster than it would be to take to trial. But a case like this, I wouldn't be surprised if a trial date might be set early on, but it might be pushed off, and it could take a year to even just get to trial. I wouldn't be surprised if some or most of these defendants plead out.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's the AG's job to do here moving forward. I spoke to a white-collar defense attorney earlier in the week who told me, he's like, look, this may not be as open and shut of a case as you might believe, even though we see them signing the documents. They recorded themselves on video doing that. We have the actual documents. This attorney told me, he's like, you have to show intent. That's the AG's job, is to show that they intended to commit a crime, or that they knew they were going to commit a crime. Some of these defendants are already publicly saying, and have been saying in the past, that they thought they were just going to be alternate electors. Yeah,
it is not an easy case to make. There is a lot of evidence, but if it went to a jury, you never know. The question is, do the defendants have the resources? Do they have the sort of mindset that they would want to fight it all the way? And if they did take it to trial, they could be found not guilty. Now, the other side of this case is we know that some of these other states have brought charges much earlier than Arizona did. These charges came, it's been 3+ years since this alleged crime actually occurred. But that has given the Arizona Attorney General's office a lot of ability to look at what the other AGs in the other states that have filed charges found. And I think that's one of the reasons why this case doesn't just have the Arizona so-called fake electors. It has 7 other, at this point, unnamed co-conspirators, co-defendants added to it. So it's a much larger document, but I think that's an indication of they were able to sort of put in writing and figure out, piece together what the conspiracy was, what happened behind the scenes that put this meeting that we've seen on camera into motion. And I believe the Attorney General's office believes that they have the evidence that these people knew what they were doing and knew that it wasn't just for show, that it was an actual crime, and that's what they're going to have to prove.
And one thing I want to bring up too, the Attorney General was very quick to acknowledge in her video that for some people this has maybe taken too long for them to play out. Now, you did a little bit of reporting, you talked a little bit about this in the past week about why we're seeing this now from the Arizona Attorney General. How come we didn't see something like this sooner?
Yeah, Chris Mays didn't take office until a year and 3 or 4 months ago. When this occurred, the Attorney General in Arizona was Mark Brnovich, a Republican who didn't show any appetite to really investigate this as a crime. He had his office investigate voting irregularities and ended up coming out and saying we didn't find any fraud in the election, but they didn't really investigate this. So this appears to have really started when Chris Mays took office. So yes, it's taken 3 years, but her office only took about a year and 3 months to get this into indictment form.
So you read through the indictments. What was you can tell us what stood out to you? What were the biggest points? We're going through that.
I mean, I think what stood out to me was the fact that they were able to include a lot of background information about how this plot was hatched. A lot of times you get an indictment and it's 2-3 pages long and it just says this crime was committed at this time. The information contained in this indictment really paints the picture of this plot that started in the White House with the president's campaign people and made its way to states like Arizona, tried to influence people here to do sort of their bidding, and some of those orders, some of what they wanted these people to do here, violated the law. And so we've got a 58-page indictment that has a lot of really in-depth and specific information. Now, I'm sure that there are good defense attorneys out there that will try to poke holes in a lot of these arguments, but the indictment as a piece of paper is pretty specific and has a lot of detail. Yeah,
and you mentioned too, there could be a lot of things that change. I mean, there could be people who make plea deals and start cooperating with investigators. Lots still to be playing out here. But you mentioned that this has got some national implications. I think we have some sound right now from the Supreme Court actually talking about this. I want to play this right now if we can and kind of get your reaction to it from the other side.
The defendant asked the Arizona House Speaker to call the legislature into session to hold a hearing based on their claims of election fraud.
Absolutely an official act for the president to communicate with state officials on a matter of enormous federal interest and concern, attempting to defend the integrity of a federal election, to communicate with state officials and urge them to view what he views as their job under state law and federal law. That's an official act.
Well, attempting to defend the integrity of the election, I mean, that's the defense. The allegation is that he was attempting to overthrow an election.
Essentially, exactly right. And neither allegation of what the purpose is should make a difference as to whether it's immune.
You said we've got lots of theories.
If we could put that a little bit in context, like what were they talking about? And this also, again, it shows that this has got national implications.
We sort of look at this as an Arizona story and just an Arizona story. This part of this plot to overthrow the results of the 2020 election have national implications, and Arizona's role and some of the people in Arizona had such an effect on this that it made it into a U.S. Supreme Court argument this week where the topic was whether the president is immune from this act. And that's another thing that came out of that hearing, is there's a possibility that maybe President Trump would have been immune from trying to interfere with this election, but nobody underneath him is immune. And that was made clear in the Supreme Court argument yesterday. And that's, I think, a little chilling for the 11 people named in Arizona in this indictment and the 7 others.
Yeah, and that was leading to my next question. I mean, could that case have any implications that's going on right now about whether the president has immunity or not, have any impact on what's happening in Arizona?
I mean, other than the fact that it restates that sometimes that this actions that you take in a political context that you might believe is a political context, the words that you say in a political context are not always protected by the First Amendment. There are laws that if you violate that First Amendment protection, that political speech protection goes out the door, and you could face legal consequences. And that was really a recurring theme in that Supreme Court argument, and it is what we are absolutely seeing on the ground here in Arizona with this case, with the Kari Lake, Stephen Richer lawsuit. I mean, we're seeing this play out in our courtrooms and on our television sets every day.
All right, Chief Investigative Reporter Morgan Loew, thank you very much for joining us here today with your insights. Still ahead, I'll bring in our panel to look at the political fallout of these indictments, which includes a man who is running for Debbie Lesko's seat in Congress when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. There are likely to be some serious political ramifications from these indictments. Let's bring in our panel. Axios reporter Jessica Boehm and Republican political consultant Marcus Dell'Artino. Thank you very much for being here today. And let's start with, before we get into some of the specifics here, what's been the reaction down at the Capitol from this? Because, you know, I can't remember a story like this in my career covering politics when you have a story this big and you have two sitting senators that are implicated in all this. What's been the reaction?
Well, unsurprisingly, Democrats immediately were calling for if these two sitting senators weren't going to leave completely, they should be stripped of their committee assignments. There should be some kind of immediate punishment. Of course, Senate President Warren Peterson said, slow down, innocent until proven guilty. We've got to let this play out. They haven't done anything to violate our ethics code, so we're not going to make any rash actions.
And it's a good thing to point out that they haven't been convicted of anything right now. They still have a chance, and will have a chance to clear their name and go through that court process. But what has been the reaction from these the two senators? We're talking about Jake Hoffman, Anthony Kern. What have they been saying? Because they have been saying at least quite a bit on social media.
Yeah, they've been on social media and adamantly deny these allegations, obviously, call it politically charged. Kern's running for Congress, as you might remember, in the West Valley, and sent out a press release and said, hey, the president asked me to show up, and I showed up. And oh, by the way, here's my website if you want to send money, which I thought was pretty smart.
Well, so, it probably works politically.
I think in a Republican primary, it's probably not a bad idea. And, by the way, it's going to get pretty expensive, so I'd be raising money, too.
Mm-hmm. And is there a chance, like, you know, at least in the Republican primaries, something like this could help a Jake Hoffman? It could help an Anthony Kern as they're moving forward in their political careers. Is that something, a calculation that could happen?
I mean, sure, if you're running in a ruby red district of sorts, and you know, I know, especially in that congressional race, there's about 1 million people running, so I don't know how it's going to shake out there. But as far as future races and stuff, sure. I mean, there are folks who firmly, truly, with all of their being, believe that this election was stolen, and that these folks acted, you know, to defend President Trump and his rightful presidency. Mm-hmm. So surely there are some folks who are, you know, who would be invigorated by this.
And what's your sense? We talked in the first segment on the AG's job now is to show intent. What's your sense on how they're going to try to defend themselves? We have been hearing that maybe some of them are saying they didn't know that they were breaking the law. They thought they were just signing something, an alternative elector slate. What else are you hearing about this?
Well, I think Anthony Kern sort of spells it out in his press release, and that is the President of the United States asked me to show up, and I showed up. And I think that will be their defense. I will tell you that their lawyer or their attorney, if they are well equipped at their job, will probably try and come up with a different argument. If you look back at the people that have been charged in other states, including in Arizona, our very own buffalo horn guy.
The QAnon
shaman. It was a similar argument, and it didn't go very well for him in court. So I think that they're going to have to be very stringent and very adamant about the case, about the point that obviously everybody would know that this wasn't a real deal. That we knew it was a ploy, an ability to raise money, whatever they can come up with, that the common citizen on the street would know that this wasn't, in effect, a real document.
Has it had any kind of a chilling effect yet on Republicans? We've seen for a few years, election denialism and these kinds of things. Are people now starting to look at this after these indictments and saying maybe we went too far on this?
I don't. No, I don't think that that's the case. I think that there's been a series of issues that have moved on from the election that are more adamant than dealing with that from 2 years ago, including immigration, including the economy, including inflation, that are the top of the mind issues for voters right now. And I think that's why you're hearing less about elections, but it's still a very strong issue, certainly down at the state legislature. I mean, look at the amount of bills that we ran on election reform.
It did. And I was going to ask you, too. I mean, have we seen any effects on that in legislation? I mean, do you think this will have any effects down at the Capitol when it comes to that? Because we saw a ton of that kind of legislation moving through this year still.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think Marcus is correct. This is, even though I think there are a lot of folks trying to not talk about it as much because, like you said, most people are more concerned about, those bread and butter issues. There are still, that is still like a very marketable point, again, in these very red districts to try to talk about, like, we are making elections safer, we are defending elections. Those are good talking points for them. And it also forces the hand of Governor Hobbs, who is almost certainly going to veto them.
So let me ask you real quick, because these senators we're talking about, at least one of Jake Hoffman, he's got a significant amount of influence down there. Talk to us a little bit about that. He's the founder of the Conservative Freedom Caucus.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, these are not like nobody senators who we found off the street to sign these petitions. These are important folks. They have a lot of influence, and they will continue to. And so it's important to keep that in mind as this continues.
And Anthony Kern may not be as well known down at the legislature to a lot of folks. Tell us a little bit about him and what he does. He's known for down at the Capitol.
I mean, certainly.
Besides praying.
He's certainly a conservative. There's no doubt about that. He's running for Congress in the West Valley district. He's known to being, he's the Jude chairman, so he's very conservative on law enforcement matters, and certainly on the pro-life matter, where at least this week he certainly cut out a lane, being one of the most ardent.
And before we wrap up here, I think it's worth pointing out, maybe you could talk to us a little bit about this. As Judiciary Chairman, didn't he launch an investigation into Chris Mays like about a month or two ago?
Well, I think that there's a committee in the House and a committee in the Senate, looking at investigating Chris Mays. And I think that there's an argument to be made that part of this is knowing that there was an indictment coming, that the legislature wanted to blunt some force from that politically by calling for their own investigation so they could say it was politically motivated. All
right, we'll have to end this segment right here. But when we come back, we return, the House repealed the territorial abortion ban. So what's going to happen in the Senate? That's next, right here on Politics Unplugged. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. It took a few tries, but the House voted to repeal the 1864 abortion ban. Next, it goes to the Senate. So what can we expect there and in the November election? Let's bring the panel back in. Thanks for sticking around here. I know it's been a very, very long week. What's the sense you're getting in the Senate? My sense is the votes are there. They just need to wait till Wednesday to get it done. That's right. I mean, last week we saw, or was it 2 weeks ago now? Time is a flat circle. But we saw the Senate voted to take a late introduction of a bill that would have done the same thing, repeal the 1864 ban. And they had enough folks. They had two senators, Senator Bullock and Senator Shope, who joined Democrats to do that. So unless something wild happens, the expectation is that those two folks will again join Democrats, and that and they will pass that bill, and it will get to the governor's desk. Because my sense is, unlike Ben Tillman, the speaker who we'll be talking about here in just a second, Warren Peterson's not going to stand in the way. He's not going to vote to repeal the law, but he's not going to be a roadblock, correct? Right, and it's worth noting that there is a special rule in the House that allows the Speaker, to have sole authority to be able to hear these things. I don't believe that exists in the Senate, and I have not heard any indication that he's going to make a big stink about having this occur. Now, obviously, the abortion debate, the issue, very heated, very polarizing, sometimes even an emotional issue. That was all on display this past week in the House. And to get this done, basically a couple of Republicans had to join with Democrats and overrule the Speaker. Tell me how that is playing with the Republican caucus.
Well, thanks for having Jessica and I on to talk about all the lighthearted issues this week. I really appreciate that. You know, look, it is going to be a difficult time for the rest of session, and I expect it to go into June the way this budget's progressing. There are some hard feelings. There is no doubt about it. What's most interesting about it is that at this particular point, there are some hard feelings about the issue. There's no doubt about that. But there was a procedural motion after the actual vote that Representative Gress made that said, I want it immediately transferred to the Senate, and pending no amendments to that bill, I want it immediately transferred to the governor. That was a little bit of a shot across the bow to leadership, basically saying, I don't trust you to transmit that bill. And there's almost never been a case of that bill successfully making it out of the chamber and not being transmitted. And so there are some very hard feelings about that, and we're going to see, I think we're going to see that carry on here for the rest of session.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because Speaker Ben Tomo is usually a pretty even-keeled guy. I'd never seen him really angry, but he was angry after that vote. So was the minority leader, Lupe Contreras. Is this going to carry forward as we start moving into budget negotiations? Is it that kind of a personal beef right now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, at this moment in time, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot of, I mean, it's a controversial issue anyway, but the Speaker is not happy about how this all came to be. You're also seeing, like, in the House, I mean, you saw so many members who were just so angry at those three folks who voted with the Democrats, saying, like, you knew what you, like, in 2022, we all knew what we were doing. This was always the plan. This 1864 bill would take effect. Yeah. And they made that extremely clear, and they're not going to let these Republicans just, like, get this through in the way that I think is happening in the Senate, where a lot of the Republican members are maybe not happy about it, but they're going to let it happen. Yeah,
and it's kind of interesting that, you know, someone like Jacqueline Parker you're talking about was very clear about that. You know, they are in ruby red districts, and it's the Republicans in those swing districts that are saying, well, we didn't mean this to happen. I mean, politically now moving forward, Matt Gress was one of the Republicans that joined with Democrats. Tim Dunn was one of the Republicans, and Wilmoth were the ones. What are their political prospects moving forward? I know Dunn doesn't even face a primary.
I was going to say, Mr. Dunn's fine.
Yeah, which is a reason maybe why he was able to politically do this. Correct?
You think? Yeah, I think so. And I think Wilmoth will be just fine. I think that Shauna Bullock's going to have a difficult election. There's no doubt about that. I think everybody in the state knows is in the Senate. It's going to have a tough race. And frankly, I think that's where the most money will be spent for these legislative races. But I think Wilmoth comes out of it just fine.
Okay, and real quick, about 30 seconds left. We've seen 3-4 weeks of terrible headlines, at least for Republicans, if you're concerned on this, like, you know, blocking these efforts to repeal this. How's this going to play out? Is this still going to be a thing in November?
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, this, if the repeal makes it to the governor's desk and is signed, it won't take effect until 90 days after the end of session, which you just unfortunately mentioned might be in June. It's going to be a long road. So this wouldn't actually take effect until later this fall. So there will be months still without abortion access. That is going to be something that Democrats hit Republicans over the head with every day until we go to the ballot box. All
right, well, I'm going to have to end it right there. Thank you very much. And that is all the time we have. Be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.